Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining me today. Before I start, I wanted to very briefly introduce myself. My name is Mae Scott. I'm an assistant professor at the Institute for Evidence-Based Healthcare at Bond University in Australia. And my work focuses predominantly on systematic reviews, both conducting them and improving methods for doing them better and faster. Today I will talk about the 2-week systematic review methodology which we developed in 2019 and the experiences we've had applying it since then to larger and more complex systematic reviews. But before I do, a little bit of a backstory about how the whole idea of 2-week systematic reviews came about. So the gentleman pictured in the upper right-hand corner is Paul Glasziou. And since I started working with Paul at Bond University about 5 years ago now, I've heard Paul say many times, computer power is increasing, gene sequencing is getting cheaper and faster, why not systematic reviews? Why aren't we doing systematic reviews in 2 weeks yet? So on the 8th of October 2018, I finally said to Paul, look, let's see if we can actually do a systematic review in 2 weeks. And that's how the whole thing started. But this is what we were up against. Back in 2017, Bora and colleagues from the United States analyzed just how much time and work goes into doing systematic reviews. They looked at 195 systematic reviews registered in Prospero and found that the median time from protocol registration to publication of a systematic review is approximately 66 weeks. Because publication time for journals varies, we wrote to the authors to ask if they had data on how long it takes from protocol registration to journal submission. And the median time for that is 41 weeks. So what we were trying to do is a systematic review in approximately 1/20th of that. So this is the systematic review we were attempting to do in 2 weeks. The topic was increased fluid intake for preventing UTIs in women. It was an intervention question. We included only randomized controlled trials, screened just under 1,400 references in title and abstract, and included 8 studies, of which 7 were meta-analyzable. The team consisted of 4 people, all of whom were very experienced. They included Chris Delmar and Paul Glasziou, who are both experienced clinicians and methodologists, as well as Justin Clark, who's the Senior Research Information Specialist at our institute, and myself, I'm an epidemiologist. The total work required 8.5 work days, or 12 calendar days, and it was split across 2 weeks, working Monday to Friday the first week. We completely forgot that Australia Day fell on the Monday of the following week, so we threw shrimp on the barbie and went off to the beach and worked Tuesday until Friday at 12:10 p.m. And the references for both the systematic review itself, as well as the methodology paper about how we did it, what automation tools we used, and barriers and facilitators are at the bottom. So what made it possible? The team was very small and very experienced. We had all previously worked on systematic reviews together before. We were also already familiar with the automation tools that we were using for that systematic review, so there was no learning curve. The systematic review itself was fairly straightforward, an intervention question which included only randomized controlled trials. We worked in close physical proximity, which is to say face-to-face and in real time. Our offices were literally next door to each other. And we had protected time to do the work, which is to say other projects were mostly on hold for the period of the 2weekSR. Now those, of course, are not standard conditions. Systematic review teams often vary in size and in experience levels of the team members. Some team members, or perhaps even all, may not be familiar with the automation tools. Systematic reviews, of course, range beyond intervention reviews to also include prognostic, adverse events, screening, and diagnostic. They may also include not just RCTs, but also observational studies or only observational studies. And environmental factors are no longer the same, with COVID being the reality for the last 18 months. Working face-to-face is an exception rather than the rule, and time zone factors are, of course, always a challenge when teams are spread across countries or continents. And finally, protected time is very, very difficult to achieve in practice, whether you are an academic or whether you are a clinician. So to test whether the 2-week systematic review methodology would work under more complex conditions, we applied it to different types of systematic reviews, which included various combinations of trials, quasi-randomized trials, and observational studies, with increased screening workloads and various experience levels of the team members involved in the systematic review. So listed here are the first 10 2-week systematic review topics that we have completed. As I mentioned earlier, the first one looked at the impact of increased fluid intake on UTIs in women. The second one also addressed urinary issues, more specifically self-management of lower urinary tract symptoms in men. You can see where the COVID pandemic broke out, we shifted more towards topics to do with infections and COVID specifically. So we looked at the impact of copper treating surfaces on healthcare-acquired infections, prevalence of asymptomatic COVID, compared seroprevalence of COVID infections with cumulative and imputed COVID cases, looked at harms and adverse events associated with wearing of face masks and how those could be mitigated. We shifted back a little bit to look at non-COVID topics. Those two systematic reviews included the impact of bed positioning on GERD and hip recs for urinary tract infections, and shifted back towards COVID, looking at the healthcare utilization changes during the COVID pandemic, as well as comparing telehealth to face-to-face prescribing of antibiotics for community-acquired acute infections. As I mentioned earlier, the first 2-week systematic review we did was an intervention question, and most of the ones that we've done since are also intervention questions. However, we've done 2 prevalence questions and 1 adverse events question. We are currently in the process of doing a modified 2-week systematic review for a prognostic question, and we've not yet attempted screening or diagnostic questions, although that's certainly in the plans. As I mentioned earlier, that first 2-week systematic review included only randomized controlled trials. We've since conducted systematic reviews which included a mix of randomized and quasi-randomized trials, a mix of randomized trials and observational studies alone. Those observational studies have been of various designs, including cross-sectional studies, interrupted time series, before and afters, and cohorts. The screening load has varied. The smallest 2-week systematic review required screening just over 450 titles and abstracts, and the largest one required screening just under 5,500 titles and abstracts. Most have been in the 1,000 to 3,000 range. They have included anywhere from 5 studies for the smallest one to 81 studies, which was a systematic review of observational studies looking at the impact of COVID on healthcare utilization. The first 2-week systematic review included 4 team members. They've since typically included 6 team members, although that largest one of 81 included studies included a team of 14. Since the first 2-week systematic review, which included only very experienced reviewers, we've included on the 2weekSRs both individuals with some previous systematic review experience. So for example, somebody who would have been involved in several systematic reviews previously, as well as individuals with no previous experience at all. what we tried to do is to limit less experienced or inexperienced people to a couple per review and to pair them with somebody who has a lot of experience so they can learn as much as possible. On one of these reviews, we also included a consumer representative, which was a very helpful experience and is something that we would like to repeat on future 2-week systematic reviews as well. The time required to complete these reviews has ranged from 5 workdays, or 1 week systematic review for a small systematic review with 6 included randomized control trials, to 18 workdays, so 3.5 weeks, and that was a very large systematic review with 81 included studies, all of which were observational studies, or more specifically interrupted time series and before and after studies. And just to clarify, the amount of time that it takes for a 2-week systematic review, the endpoint for that is the time at which we reach a fully completed manuscript. So it has all the sections written up, all of the figures, all of the tables, all of the analyses are completed and in the manuscript, and the manuscript is ready to either be circulated externally for feedback or to be formatted for submission to a journal. So what have we learned from all of that? Well, we've learned plenty. We found that the 2-week systematic review methodology scales up or down depending on the size and the complexity of the systematic review, and it has ranged so far from a 1-week systematic review for a small systematic review of 6 randomized trials to 3.5 weeks for a large systematic review of 81 observational studies. Which is to say, the method offers a considerable saving over the median estimated time to complete a systematic review, which is 41 weeks. Another lesson learned is that it's very, very hard to do protected time in academia and clinical practice, to sort of quarantine a couple weeks to work on just one project. We found it's most important to have that quarantine time for the screener and extractor pair and less so for others. For example, the search specialist involvement or medical librarian involvement is crucial in the earlier days, a little bit less so farther down the track. Clinicians are needed on an ad hoc basis. However, what we find is very, very helpful is if all of the team members can attend daily 20 or 30-minute meetings, which we hold every day as part of the 2-week systematic review process, and that helps to keep everybody up to date on what's going on, as well as enables us to address any issues that come up and challenges and questions can be resolved. We've experimented with modifications to the timeline, again, to address this issue of the difficulty to quarantine off 2 weeks to do one project. One of my colleagues really likes the approach of working 3 days on, 2 days off, which is to say he works on the 2weekSRs 3 days a week, and the other 2 days a week he saves to work on other projects that he has going on at the same time. What we have also learned is that there is a sweet spot for team size. It can be neither too big nor too small. The risk with having too small a team is that there's not enough pairs of hands to do the work. Conversely, the risk with having too large a team means that there's an increased cat herding or people management workload, keeping track of where everybody is up to and what they need to progress to next, as well as keeping track of all the information flow, which is to say the volume of emails goes up considerably with a larger team, as well as the number of files to manage. Finally, we learned that there is a spillover effect. Since we developed the 2-week systematic review methodology, we noticed that colleagues who were working on systematic reviews that are not intended as 2-week systematic reviews have also adopted elements of the 2weekSR methodology, and those reviews seem to be completed faster. So what I mean when I say elements of the 2-week systematic review methodology is, for example, doing tasks back to back to decrease the mental reload, or, for example, holding the morning meetings on a regular basis to maintain the momentum of the systematic review. So what's next? Since that first 2-week systematic review, we've emphasized and prioritized the continued automation tool development. Tools we have developed since then include the Screenatron, Disputatron, Deduplicator, and Methods Wizard. Methods Wizard is currently in beta, and it will be officially unveiled as part of the World Evidence-Based Healthcare Day on the 20th of October. And what that tool does is it assists in the writing of the methods section of the protocol for a systematic review. So watch this space. We plan to extend the methodology to other types of evidence synthesis, including scoping reviews and living reviews. And we are prioritized training and teaching of others in the methodology. So a few months back, we trained a local group at a neighboring university in this methodology, and their first 2weekSR was recently completed. They submitted it to a journal in just under 8 weeks. Thank you very much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with me, this is my email and my Twitter account. All of the systematic review automation tools that we develop are freely available together with the help guides and videos on the Systematic Review Accelerator website, and I'm happy to answer any questions.